Welcome back to the Grief Observed podcast. My name is Brad Morrell. I am your host. And if you would like to join me for an episode, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Grief Observed podcast. You can find me on TikTok at tiktok.com at Grief Observed podcast, or you can get me on Gmail, same name, Grief Observed podcast. Today, my guest is Cathy Williams. She is an award winning author, speaker, and trainer. And we're going to speak a little bit about grief and how her work can help those who are dealing with grief issues. So, Cathy, thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks, Brad. It's nice to be
Great.
connected.
Yeah, it's we were joking before, you're kind of a time traveler. You're in Australia, so you're the day ahead of me right now. It's 7:13 in the evening here, and what time is it there for you?
It would be 9:13 a.m. following day.
Okay, so you said the future's great. I can't wait to get there. So anyway, thank you for joining me. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I founded my business Intuitive Self, which the intention behind Intuitive Self is to create spaces, experiences, and resources to support people reconnecting with their body, heart, and mind.
Hmm.
And reestablishing ways to creatively connect with deep parts of ourselves to support us to navigate all the different ebbs and flows of this wildlife. And my main modality is somatic movement and expressive art therapy. So it's different to traditional talk therapy methods because we bring in the body. We acknowledge that the body is a whole complete self, and it works best when we're all talking to each other, our body, heart, mind, and spirit all connected. And my main work is really allowing people to feel safe again in their body through the different processes I guide them and nervous system regulation and being able to feel their feelings and express them in a way where, yes, we are making meaning of the different colors, lines, and shapes that come out on the page and our movements and expression through the body so that we can feel more resourced in life.
Hmm. Excellent. Yeah, I like kind of that holistic look. You know, so many times we try to single out one portion of our lives. Rather, it's you- we were talking before we started about how, a lot of times we look at only the mind or only the body, but when you start looking at mind, body, and spirit together, it really changes the way people, I think, view themselves, view life, view
Mm,
problems. Because so many times we often like will treat only one portion of those things as well.
yes.
There's so much like with the physical body that actually impedes on mental health. And, if somebody comes into my office and says, I'm really having a lot of trouble with anxiety or depression, one of my first questions is, when's the last time you went to the doctor? Because sometimes there are physical things that may be challenging the mental health side. So, why don't you talk a little bit more about the somatic and maybe even define that for our listeners in case they're unfamiliar with the term somatic?
Yeah. So the somatic lens is where we really acknowledge the body. So we're looking at how the body stores everything that we've experienced. And the philosophy behind it is that when we involve the body, when we presence the body in a session, when we're together, what is happening in our body today? Where do we feel that?
Mhm.
And how do we connect with the different sensations in our body? Because we're storing different emotions. And the belief is really that when we involve the body, when we bring in movement, we're also able to change and shift the psyche as well. So with what you were just saying, I definitely feel that in our Western society, we give preference and priority to the mind. So it's cognitive, we're problem solving. We think we need to work through our emotions. And I know that experience. For a really long time, I lived predominantly in my mind, and I almost kept myself really busy and overproductive
Mm.
to not actually pause and stop and feel what was present, what was actually moving through my system. And I recognize this now from my past self, but also in my clients as different coping mechanisms that we develop over time where we might be disconnecting from the body. We might be suppressing or numbing our feelings, distracting ourselves. So the work is really to learn to feel safe again in the body, to re-enter our body so that we're able to not just give preference to the mind, but actually feel into the body again and work with the body in partnership. So it's my belief that our body is actually our ally. And when we start to bring in the somatics, we're able to acknowledge the heaviness that we might be feeling, the contraction, the tension, and bring in a curious inquiry with, okay, what could that be? What's going on there? Now, my own experience of grief means that, well, has meant that what I used to be very good at, which was compartmentalizing and being like, okay, this is when I'm in work mode, this is when I'm doing some self-reflection, this is when I'm socializing. For me, different waves and different seasons of grief have been all-consuming.
Mm.
And it's meant that I feel it really strongly in my body, whether that is a complete heaviness, a lethargy, whether that is the rising up and spilling out of different emotions, whether it's sadness or anger. And these practices, this work, me being so familiar and connected with my body after all of this time, has actually been the most support for me to be able to learn different ways that I can actually give those feelings the space that they deserve, to look at them compassionately, to feel them without trying to suppress it or cut it off early, and then learn to actually involve the body to move through those emotions in a way where I can let it out, release it, and still be able to function in my everyday life.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that I do in my office is EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And what I've learned is that when a trauma occurs, whether it's the loss of a loved one, a car wreck, whatever it is, there's the event that we see in our world that kind of gets locked in with a feeling inside the body. So
Mm,
a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have somebody focus on the event, but also focus on what was the feeling that you had in that moment, and when you can get somebody to tap into that, because sometimes our anxieties are produced by a body feeling, and sometimes a body feeling may trigger that inside of a moment in our lives. But sometimes thinking about that moment as well can actually trigger something in the body to feel like we did in the moment that we experienced that trauma. So,
yes.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So there's an exercise that I often guide people, particularly in our initial sessions when we're working together. And it's starting with a body scan.
Hmm.
But then afterwards in the debrief, we're breaking up in three sections. So the different thoughts that might have been present in the mind, the different sensations that they might have been aware of, whether that was a tingling sensation or heat perhaps, or a particular part of their body that was loud in the moment, and then emotions that might have been present. And as we start to reconnect with the body, heart, mind, and spirit and bring them together, I find that a really insightful process to actually start to, for the client to get familiar with, oh, when this thought comes up, this sensation's present. And that's linked to this emotion. So
Mm,
they're starting to put the connections together. And I, when we're tracking that in our own body, in our own field of awareness, it's really good for the reconnection, but also to be able to then learn ways that we can compassionately be with those different parts of ourselves. Because a lot of the time, those emotional states, those sensations can be quite uncomfortable. So learning how to support ourselves, support our bodies, and support our nervous systems through that is really important.
yeah. I've got to punch rewind just a little bit here and find out, how did you get interested in this type of work?
Yeah, I've kind of jumped right in, haven't I,
No, you're
Brad?
good. You're good.
Um, so I guess from the very start, I had been working in community development. So my work had always been in a capacity building grassroots way with community. Predominantly, that was in developing communities overseas. And in that work, I actually became quite burnt out. Um, and I recognized the many ways that I was really overgiving, but not actually tending to myself and different traumas that I'd experienced. I found myself in it was essentially a women's circle, but the facilitator had come back from doing her somatic dance movement training. And that's when I was first introduced to this work. And I was diving into all kinds of studies and being mentored by different pioneers in the field, but finding it the most relevant when I was moving through my own personal challenges, particularly coming out of a psychologically abusive relationship
Mm,
and finding myself in the early stages of motherhood, and my whole world was changed around. Through the years, the work has developed in not only what my personal practice is, but then the workshop spaces that I hold for others. And it's evolved as I've evolved as well. Most recently, in the last couple of years, my work has, I guess, gone in different directions where I'm training other practitioners who might work with clients, whether they're counselors, social workers, youth workers, and how they can support their own systems and their own bodies with this work, but also start to weave it into their client work.
mm,
And what I was finding was that there was a big theme around grief and how do we tend to our grief? And then the links between what I've done for myself personally and then being able to hold spaces where other people can, within safe containers, feel supported to feel what is present in their grief journey became more apparent. So that's where the work is now. And it's been this process of really supporting other people individually, but mainly in groups, to actually sit with what is there and meet it with gentle, tending compassion.
nice. Whenever someone experiences a grief, whether it's the death of a loved one or a divorce or whatever their grief is, what do you think happens inside the body that people may not understand?
Oh, I feel like it's very unique to everyone's personal experience of how safe do they feel to
Mhm.
feel what is rising in them at the moment.
That's good. Yeah.
So if they don't feel safe, for example, if they were told, oh no, don't cry, they're in a better place, all those kind of things, the external pressure that comes in moments of loss and grief and transition can be incredibly damaging. And we can take that on. We can take on those stories from other people and then suppress, then disconnect, then keep ourselves really busy organizing the funeral or doing different things to not feel those feelings or to not feel allowed or given permission to do that.
Mm.
And when we have those moments where we are suppressing, I feel like that can be really damaging. And grief can be incredibly isolating as well, where we don't feel like we can talk to others or bring it up, or we don't want to be a burden on others, for example, a burden. And other people's comments can also solidify that for us as well, if they are often dismissive or they don't know how to sit with the uncomfortable emotions that are present.
Yeah. I sit here and I think that grief is obviously the things that we feel. Grief is kind of what we feel honestly inside, but mourning is something that we either observe or do on the outside. How important do you think it is to actually mourn and have a physical outpouring of what we're really feeling about our grief on the inside?
Mm. I think it's key. I believe that it's key. And this work that I do is on supporting people to find what works for them in their mourning rituals. How do they mourn in a way that feels good to release, that feels good to
Mm.
acknowledge, that may need to be witnessed, that may need to be tended to? And this isn't something that we do for a certain period of time and then we never return to again. I feel like, we have some cultures who really beautifully acknowledge the long, how the different seasons of grief and how we need to come together as a village and a community more to really support those mourning, but also that it comes in waves and it can be days, months, years, and then it rises again. And how do we, yes, it might shape shift the impact that it has on us in that moment, but how do we still tend to that and care for others going through that?
Yeah. Are there specific physical experiences that you think you've witnessed within people who are going through grief? Like, what are some common things that you see about their physical experience or their somatic experience?
Mm. Yeah, so one of the areas of my work is supporting people to meet the emotion and to feel safe within that container, whether that's a one-on-one session or in a group, to actually express that. And that has come out in so many different ways, Brad. It has come out in the body needing to express an anger, a rage. The grief is
Mm,
coming out. And that might be, doing some really strong, bold movements with their hands, with their legs, pressing against the floor or a wall to really release that.
mm,
Sometimes it has looked like stillness and gentle self-to-self touches where they're really holding themselves, using the weight of a heavy blanket to feel tended to and supported. It has looked like shaking. It has looked like rubbing and caressing. It's very fascinating the different ways that the body needs to release what's stored inside. And we see it in our animals, yeah? Like we see how
mm,
a dog might need to shake off we see how a horse needs to stand and just reground and have moments of subtle stillness where they're supporting their nervous system. We're the same, but we often don't acknowledge the different ways our nervous system needs to move through emotions.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that you bring up, animals do it naturally. Why do you think humans feel so I don't know if inhibited is the right word, but like why do we close up and close off certain areas and think that uh is there something weird about me just shaking off my frustrations? Like to me, it's no. If that's what it takes for you to, like you said, reground, reset, to
Mm,
have a fresh mind, it's not weird at all. It may be, for example, I'll tell people too that normal is highly subjective. What's normal to you may be completely abnormal to me, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong, right?
yes. Yeah.
I witness people that come in the office, they're exhausted, they have lack of sleep, uh,
Hmm.
their eating habits may be off when they're going through a grief or have lost a loved one. They may have physical pains. Grief
Yes.
affects us all in different ways, and I don't think there's any wrong way to do it. You
Mm.
mentioned animals. And one of the things I think about is like, okay, my dog Maverick, whenever it storms, he goes nuts. Like he hates storms. I
Mm.
know they have like the weighted dog blankets and things like that. I have a weighted blanket. I haven't used it in a long time, but after this conversation, I want to break it out. It's like I sleep really well with a weighted blanket. They say use like 10% of your body weight. And have you ever used a weighted blanket before?
Yes,
I
yeah,
love
I
it.
have one for me and my daughter. Yeah.
It's like I don't know, a hug while you're sleeping. Um,
Yes.
but I really feel like so many times we just think things are too awkward, or what if somebody's watching me when I do a
Mm.
certain ritual or something that I need to do to kind of shake off this depression or this grief or I don't know. What do you say to people who have
Mm.
reservations about doing something physical to release?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because I feel like we have so many reservations, hesitations, and there is society's imposed restrictions and then the ones that we create for ourselves or that our circle of friends or family might put on us, you know, not they're not conscious of what they might be saying or doing. They might think that they're being very helpful. But if we have a fear of judgment, of being dismissed or misunderstood, of course we're going to feel like we can't just get up and say that we're uncomfortable or, I need to leave this space. I need to brush myself down. I need to shake off.
Mm,
They might not feel confident to be able to do that because of what people might say, observe, how they might be judged, how they might be misunderstood. And that is very much on there's an inner narrative that's at play there, and maybe that comes from an experience that they had. Maybe they did have the courage to get up and shake themselves off or ask, I'm just going to be excused for this moment in a social setting, and they might have had someone make rude comments. They might have lost friendships. Who knows what has happened to instill that in them? But we carry those experiences and we remember, and our body remembers that. So
oh
we don't
yeah.
feel safe. Yeah.
Yeah, it brings to mind, the body keeps the score. Very popular book and method
Yeah.
to think about, but it's so true that our body does remember. And I feel like there's times where people try to ignore or suppress their grief to make it more comfortable for somebody else. And
Mm,
really, I think what happens is they're probably storing more inside of their body that they're going to have to deal with later. And honestly, if you think about it too, I tell people that you can deal with grief right now, or you can deal with it later, and you're going to pay a far more significant price dealing with it later, right? You're
Yeah.
gonna pay it with interest later if you don't
Yes.
deal with it now. But when you think about the body, do you think uh, the body does store up more if you don't deal with grief currently?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's been my experience, and I can tell also with the bodies that I get to work with, when we don't deal with something in the moment and then that is suppressed and built up over time, that's when dis-ease happens. That's when
Mm,
people can get really sick. I've seen it in people that I'm close with over the years, and I see it in my clients where, it might start with pain, and the body is always constantly signaling to us. And part of my work is how do we learn to listen to those signals and to actually get curious about them and do some further inquiry with it, because the body does store. We have, there's all this different science now on that exact thing. And so being able to learn ways where we can feel supported to meet different parts of the body and work with the different parts of the body and how we're storing different emotions is really key, I think.
yeah. I think so many times too, people are pressured by family members, friends, whoever, that you need to move on. And I never try to use that term in grief, move on. Certainly we have to carry forward and move forward, but moving on almost means like you're moving away from an individual or a loss completely.
Mm.
But what do you think as far as the body is concerned? Do you feel like there's a pressure to move on, and to have a full release of grief and never to go back and revisit? Or do you feel like, we talked about grief being like in waves, there's times, do you think, I guess, the body waxes and wanes with grief?
Yeah, so my personal experience is that it comes in waves and that it does wax and wane, as you say. What I believe is most effective and what we do with the somatic lens is, sure, someone might have booked a session and cognitively be thinking, this is what I want to work with. I'm going to bring this.
Hmm.
And that's great. It's good to have on the form. It's good to have that initial conversation. But what I'm more interested in is, where is your body at today? What is the body presenting?
Hmm.
Because the body is a doorway into the present moment and what has, what I like to call, like, the most charge for us in that moment. What needs to be worked with, what needs to be looked at, what is actually yearning and signaling for your attention.
Hmm.
And not only do I feel like this is the best way to work with someone, what are they currently holding, but it also means that when we learn to read and recognize our body signals, we're then acknowledging that. And we can check in, okay, what does my body need right now? Do I feel safe to do that, to express that, to meet that here? And working with that, because it's being able to feel like we can regulate ourselves over time. And that
Hmm.
doesn't that doesn't mean suppressing it. It means actually giving it space to be moved through. And it's the same with, physical activity. So we know that we can feel better even if we want to stay in bed all day. We will feel better if we just get up, being gentle with ourselves, have a stretch, go for a walk. It changes our relationship to our body. It changes perspective. It moves something, even if it's just 1%. And
Hmm.
then we can go back to bed, whatever the moment is. But What I'm saying is that when we're actually giving our grief the space to be acknowledged, and we're not going straight into suppression or distraction or numbing, then we're able to let the grief be seen and heard. And I think that is one of the key ways that we can still meet these parts of ourselves and still function in the world as caregivers and doing our jobs and meeting ourselves.
Yeah, you were talking about I guess giving that 1%. And sometimes a win for me in counseling is when someone, uh, you know, instead of trying to hit the home run every day, what if you just get out of bed, take a shower, put your pajamas back on, and get back in bed? Like that may
Mm,
be a win for somebody. But I sit there and
absolutely.
think sometimes we may train ourselves in negative ways. For example, um, if I gave you, a Kleenex, it doesn't weigh very much, right? A facial tissue, it's like, here you go. It doesn't weigh much. But if I start handing you multiples and you start carrying those, it does start weighing you down. But if it's, I guess, a little bit at a time, you don't realize the weight of what you're carrying. I
Mm,
wonder how
mm,
many times in grief that we just start taking on so much that we don't even realize what we're holding inside of our bodies until someone like you says, "What would it feel like to let that go? Like to totally expel this negative feeling outside of your body. What does that feel like?" Do you see that I guess people hold on to more than what they realize in life?
absolutely. I feel like we often don't prioritize actually tuning in with ourselves. And therefore we don't know how much we're really holding.
Hmm.
It's so fascinating, when I hold these group workshops and we just start with a simple first inquiry with what are you bringing today? What's actually there? And when we create this sacred space to actually listen to what's there, they might not, your body might not have been listened to in that way for a really long time. And so it can be quite overwhelming what's actually there and wanting your attention. And that can feel really heavy. It can spill out, but meeting it and even just sort of leaning in, 5% and being like, okay, what's there? What can I work with? And that might be just acknowledging the heaviness in our chest and placing a hand there.
One of the things that I wanted to ask whenever I first knew that we were going to speak is more from a psychological aspect in what you've seen in your work. But when I sit there and think about, especially when someone's lost a family member or a friend in a specific way. For example, if you lost a grandfather by, say, a brain tumor, do you see where people have more somatic issues with like headaches? Or if they lost, say, a mother to a heart attack, do you see these people holding more in their chest as far as their own somatic issues, or is there no connection at all?
Wow. I don't feel qualified to comment on that. That feels really fascinating to me, and I would love to be able to intentionally track that. But I
Yeah.
haven't made enough correlation.
Hmm. Yeah, it's I don't know if you would go in down the psychosomatic area of that where, something mental is disturbing us because of something we've witnessed in another. And
Mm,
I hope I didn't put you on the spot there, but it's
no.
interesting to think about. But I have seen it where, someone will be like, "Wow, you experience a lot of headaches, and if I recall, your loved one died of a brain tumor, and that's what we've been working on. How much do you think
Mm,
that plays in?" So I would imagine that a lot of people feel something And I don't believe that it's like phantom, right? I do believe they really are experiencing these pains or these aches, whatever it is,
Yes.
but unknowingly locked into some trauma or some grief that they already have. I think that would
Mm.
be a really, really interesting thing to track. So,
Wouldn't it be an amazing study?
yeah.
That would be an amazing intentional study to see, a focus group of different people who have lost others from particular illnesses and then the correlation of their symptoms.
Yeah, I wonder if there are differences too between, a natural death, like someone dies of what we just say is old age, versus a traumatic death.
Mm.
One thing that I've gotten into over the last couple of years, or maybe the last year and a half, is epigenetics, and it's a really interesting thing. Is what we used to call junk DNA. We now know that there's a purpose on certain DNA that we just didn't really realize what it did before. But I've seen and I read a book. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It was by a guy named Mark Wallen. I cannot think of the name. I think it didn't start with you. I think that's the name of the book. But
Right.
he talked about, gosh, I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, one example was a 10-year-old boy who felt like his skin was burning all the time. And they took him to the doctor, and the doctor gave some weird diagnosis for this kid. But come to find out in family history, his father had burnt down their family home and unintentionally it killed his brother. And so through epigenetics, it's almost like that trauma was passed down to the son.
Oh my
And
God.
so somatically, that trauma is locked into this child. And I don't
Mm.
want people to misunderstand me here. I feel like we all have responsibility to work on our issues, but sometimes the things that we experience, even down to a somatic level, may not be our own traumas that we're dealing with. So how do you let that go?
Mm.
That is like the $1 million question right there.
And I do wonder, like, when those links are made and when you're able to make that correlation and acknowledge, oh, okay, you know, that's linked to that, that's linked to this, what then happens with those symptoms? Now that
Sure.
you've made that connection, now that you've acknowledged it in that way, what then happens? Because I definitely see with clients over time when they are supported and learn how to meet the different parts of them and the different tend to the different body signals and get curious about what's being communicated, then there is more ease. There's more softening, there's more expression that happens.
Sure. I think recognition is probably worth way more than what we would give it. I remember years ago that I would say seasonal affective disorder every October. And one of my friends, Gary, he's like, Brad, don't you have a lot going on this week, like in history for you? And I'm like, yeah, I
Mm,
do. It's my birthday. I was married a couple of days later on a date, and then her birthday was the a few days later, and then a few days later in history, we got divorced on that same week. It was like 1 week of just dates after dates, anniversaries, right? And
oh, wow.
and not so good things. But once I recognized it, it was like, okay, now I know how to deal with it, or at least I know that it's coming and I need to do something about it, like a preemptive strike on my own anxiety or depression during that time period. So just
Mm,
recognizing that, hey, this is a difficult week each year for you. That made a lot of difference in how I felt each year. It really did.
yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure that there's a term for that as well. Like, thank you so much for sharing that because it does remind me just how much the body remembers. And we can track those anniversaries. I had a similar experience with the birth of my daughter, which was quite traumatic. So, in the lead up to her birthday, in those first couple of years of her life, my body would remember, and I didn't know, I couldn't recognize what was going on at the time. She's 12 now, but the when I was able to recognize, oh, it's because my body is going back into feeling like it's giving birth again, then it was able to, I haven't had that, it lasted for about the first 3 years of her life, but it is interesting when we're able to recognize.
Yeah. Now I know a part of your work also is in arts, right? Expressive arts or
Yeah, so I combine the somatic movement, body-based healing with expressive art therapy.
Mhm.
And that is with every session, it supports the processing. It can also support the integration where we might be capturing our experience of what was moved. We might be doing a body map of what we feel, where the grief is, what's the loudest part of the body or the sensations right now. It could be actually going through a guided visualization and seeing what then comes out on the page, and that might then become a strength symbol for the client. So it's really it adds many different modalities to the expressive arts part of the work.
Yeah. I use something called embodied dialogue where I'll have somebody visualize like where is the grief inside of your body. And
Mm,
I got this method from my friend and mentor Bob Niemeyer, who is really big in the grief world. But when I find that someone can hang on to something tangible to that represents their grief or even represents their healing, they can make really great progress in the healing process. So I feel like it's really important to express ourselves that way, whether it's
yes.
through art, whether it's through music. As you can see, I'm in my music studio here. You know, if I can create a song that represents how I'm feeling,
Mm,
and I jokingly say that I only write good music when I'm really down. You know, I'm not really creative if I'm in a really good mood. I don't know why that is, but I think when I'm down, I need something that says this is what I feel because I don't have any other way to express it.
yes, beautifully put. Yeah. I think often we can get caught up in the narrative, and then when we're unable to find words for that, yeah, you're right, the different creative avenues, what that then brings, whether that is putting it in song form, putting it out on the page in different colors, lines, and shapes, writing a creative fiction about it so that you're a little bit detached from it. It's
Mm.
very fascinating all the ways that this can go and support someone's experience.
Yeah, I like that. And I wonder how somebody's experience would change if they're able to externalize their own person into a character in a story. Like, does that person have more courage? Does that person have more hope? I would dare to say yes, that the person in the story would likely be bolder than the person writing the story who has
Mm,
firsthand experienced the grief. But then to be able to look at this person that I've created on paper and then maybe be able to go out and live that type of lifestyle, like whether it is
yeah,
a restorative story, right? That if this person can do it, why can't I? And it's so weird how we can make these fictional characters bolder than what we can do for ourselves. But I really do believe
mm,
it provides a great measure of hope for those that can externalize who they are.
I do too. And then, it opens up so many doorways of then how do we see ourselves in that character? How can we start to embody some of those qualities of that character? And, because it's come from us, these creative stories, these creative paintings, this creative music, it comes from within us. So we can also access that for ourselves.
Yeah, I think we're just so hard on ourselves as humans. It's when grief occurs, we often go into the woulda, shoulda, couldas, right? Like I should have done this, or I can't believe I did that. And um I think as time goes along, if we are able to externalize and think, okay, especially if I lost my one of my best friends like 15 years ago. And,
Mm,
there's certainly things that I wish I would have said or could have done with him before he passed. But now, if I were to go back and talk to, um, I'm now 50, so I would have been talking to the 35-year-old me. What would I say to the 35-year-old version of myself? I can
mm,
promise you that I would, if it were a stranger or an externalized version of myself, I would probably talk way kinder to that person than I do to my own self today, who still beats myself up like, oh, you should have done this. You should have said this to him. But if I truly externalize it and think of my younger self as a true human, which I was,
yes.
um, I would be kinder to that person.
Mm,
Like if I saw my 35-year-old self sitting on a park bench crying about what I should have said or should have done, I would go up to that guy and say, "Hey, you're okay. Your friend knew that you loved him. You got to write a lot of music with this guy. You got to experience a lot of great things in life. I
yeah.
don't think you left anything on the table." I don't know. I feel like anytime we can externalize who we are, and before we started recording, we were talking about internal family systems. And I think
Mm,
that's a really big piece because we all talk about a part of ourselves, right?
mm,
Okay, which part is that, And even if it's a younger part, I think they all have valid positions. No part of us is wrong. It's just how do we extend that forgiveness to ourselves over the things that we think we should have done differently? I don't know.
yeah. That's so beautiful, Brad. So well explained. We can be so harsh on ourselves, and being able to cultivate more compassion is definitely a skill.
You've worked with a lot of people who've gone through loss. Um, Maybe speak a moment, like what have you learned about people with resilience? Do you find people are resilient?
I feel like when, yeah, resilience is fascinating and I would love to study it more. I feel like we have great capacity
Hmm.
for courage and resilience and strength. And unfortunately, we're not really shown this until we go through some kind of adversity or multiple different adversities to see our capacity for our resilience and how that shines through. I feel like we don't really know always what we're capable of. And we can also build up a lot of resentment to having to be strong and having to keep going and having to draw upon our resilience once again. But there is so many beautiful moments and lessons that can come through our different lived experience as well. And when we're able to be in a space where we can be grateful for that, I think
Hmm.
that that then helps us build that resilience as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we don't know what we're capable of until we are truly tested. I've been lucky or blessed for most of my life. I'll say that I've not lost a lot of people in my life. I mean, I've lost grandparents, I've lost my best friend, um, but I still have. I jokingly say I have four parents. I really do. Like my parents are divorced, so I've got four parents who I have not lost.
Mm,
And I know that as time if time plays out the way that it normally does, chronological order says I will say goodbye to four parents.
mm,
I'm the middle child between two girls. When you think about siblings, one of us is going to, well, two of us are going to say goodbye to the first one who dies, and one of us is going to have to watch two of their siblings die.
yeah,
It's a weird factor in loss. But are we resilient? Yes. Can I handle something currently? No. The one thing that I learned about my friend Chad, or I really feel like now, is that at the time of his death, certainly it was the worst thing that I had ever experienced.
mm,
But my father, and I've mentioned this on a couple of other podcasts, but my father had an episode where he went down, and I beat the emergency crew to the hospital, and I'm thinking, man, if my dad shows up here dead, what am I gonna do? But I had this really weird peace that came over me that said, you've gone through this with Chad, and if your dad does show up here dead, you're going to be okay. You have survived this before. Now, I will tell you
mm,
this, before Chad's death, I don't know that I would have survived my father's death. Like it would have been more than I could handle that I
mm.
think. Um, so I feel like everything that we experience is a stepping stone. It's a block of encouragement to step up onto that says, yeah, I couldn't handle this before, but because of my past experience, I can now experience and handle harder things in the future. It's not that
Yeah,
we want to, but it's that we now are enabled to do so.
to do so, yes. Yeah, that's so beautiful and such a nice recognition of all of the strength and insight that you were able to take from those experiences.
Yeah. And I think most people, if they haven't hit a place of that yet, they likely will. And they are capable of way more than what they think they're capable of. And a lot of times our experiences pushes us into a place that we're unwilling to go in any other circumstance, but sometimes you're
Yeah.
forced into those areas and you have to do what you have to do. So So why don't you tell people where they can find you and find your work and get a hold of you? And certainly I'll put it in the show notes when we're done here. But just tell people where they can find you.
Thanks, Brad. It's been, yeah, such a beautiful conversation and a beautiful way to connect. So, if people were interested in this work or my books or my workshops or one-on-one support, they can find me at intuitiveself.com.au. I do most of my work online, so we can definitely find a time that works. And there's a page on my website called Grief Tending,
Hmm.
which is the different online support sessions that I run. And my second book, Heart Wisdom, is an offering. I ran a container last year with 10 different women. We went through an 8-month container and we were meeting each month with what was most present in our heart. And through the different modalities that I've shared today, we dived into the different landscapes of the heart. And what came out was this collection of personal essays and short stories and collage pieces, drawings, paintings, sculpture that is an offering now that's going to be made public this month. And it's also weaved between the different shared creations are different prompts for the reader to connect with their own heart and their own heart's wisdom. So that is an offering that's available on my website as well. I'll share the links.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll put that in the show description. So if you're driving around and can't write this down, I'll have it in the show description. You can click on it and go right to it. But I really appreciate you being on the show today and just sharing your knowledge and wisdom with people. And I do hope that they reach out to you. And certainly, I hope you continue doing what you're doing too. I know you're reaching a lot of people, and your work is certainly appreciated.
Thank you, Brad. You too. It's really nice to connect in these kind of conversations with other practitioners.
Sure. Any final thoughts that you want to share with the listeners before we close out?
I guess my final thought is I really encourage people to carve out little moments for themselves to just be in compassionate space with the different parts of themselves.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah. And listeners, thanks for tuning in to the Grief Observe podcast. Again, I'll have Cathy's information in the show description. Please reach out to her, and we hope to catch you on the next episode. So have a great day, everyone.